Philosophers talk to our times, we citizens of dystopia. There is a trap that's very interesting in dystopia, because it is the system that will catch all narratives in Simulacara. Let me explain what that means in terms of the paradox of that statement. Simulacara is fundamentally a structuralist type theory. The idea that if you think about what matters to you, it is really the furniture of your mind. All the fever dreams of things you are and things you want to be. Memories you half have. The fabric of a world then that lies inside you. That when it reaches out to the wider world, reaches out to it as it imagines that world to be. It is a world, therefore, of signs and symbols, where one memory gestures towards another, and that towards another, and they are all gossamer, gone, blown with the wind, and just remembered. We live then in the tissue of our minds. The tissue of our minds is the tissue of Simulacara. Virtual realities, some of which once were, most of which were never. It's why I think computer games are so addictive. They tell the brain the story it thinks it lives in. A story of moving images. A story where there is a plot, but that plot is far removed from anything that anyone has lived. And that is the point of this. That is the point of them. Because they capture that antidote to truth that is the Simulacara. There is no point then asking, what is the meaning? Because the meaning is the meaning. The meaning is there isn't meaning. The meaning is the appeal beyond a here and now into a ... You keep the dots open. That was one theory. Roughly Bourdieu. Not a theory I have any sympathy with, I have to confess to you. Then there was always the second theory that I was always taught in Cambridge donkeys years ago, was the alternative theory to structuralism. This was dear old Paul Ricoeur. And the idea that meaning actually happened on the level of the narrative, not on the level of the spoken word. Meaning was on the level of the sentence. Meaning was on the level of the paragraph. To understand meaning, therefore, you had to understand the narrative. You had to understand the entire story, the big picture. Now, Paul Ricoeur was no doubt doing it to understand where God existed in creation. He was a theologian. I have to confess I've never read Paul Ricoeur, but that's always been my working assumption. He was to show how the death of the author simply implied an author at a different point. The antidote then to Roland Barthes. And that's all jolly good and dandy. And yet, of course, one of the things that we are forever doing is trapping our narratives in the world of the Simulacara. So one of the features of any dystopia is that narratives just simply mesh you inside more truly that which never quite was. The point, of course, about a good narrative is that if that narrative is about you or about people who seem to be normal humans, I mean non-heroes, I suppose I mean non-gods. In another life I'm a storyteller and telling the stories of gods. And gods can be simple. It is the prerogative of any pagan god that although they might have many facets, they are always simpler than the humans which worship them. For in our humanity, all motives are complex. In our humanity, it is always hard to read people. It is hard to read yourself. If I wanted to say why I don't like the Simulacara, is that it mistakes the complexity of being a human. The complexity does not lie in that everything is Simulacara. Because even if it wasn't, humans wouldn't understand themselves at all well anyway. We don't. And what narratives do is to simplify everything. They give you the one story that you are going to follow. And if it doesn't work, they'll give you another narrative that you are going to follow. Therefore, all the ways you understand your humanity in total, gets reduced to characters that can be within narratives. And that certainly is a simulacra. That is certainly not the truth itself, not even a 10th part of the truth. It is merely a distortion of what the world is and what it can look like. And the problem, of course, is then that we all get caught up in our own narratives, which work out like little computer games that we're just playing along to, and bear no relation to actually what is. Politically, that is, of course, disastrous, because we endlessly rage against things that are very difficult to change. I mean, for example, just a stupid, horrible example, letting off third world debt, which is a no-brainer. Of course we should do that. The problem is that the entire system, which is always based on pain anyway, is based on the system of the value of money in the world beyond the gold standard, is based on some sort of debt in it. It's based on third world debt. So if you simply renege the system, the entire system collapses and money becomes valueless again. My point about it is then the narrative, let's just get rid of third world debt, doesn't fit within the complex world in which we are in. Not easily, not straightforwardly. Narratives always distort because they always misplace reality. Notice at this point, I think it is worth avoiding the other, the scholar to the Charybdis, which is that you could say, well, that means all money is necessarily fictive, illusionary. It is just a simulacra. And while I would understand you saying that as a way of understanding the collapse of any simple narrative to understand money, I, of course, have my own simple narrative to understand money, but one that I think captures slightly better that money at some point is based somewhere in the system on suffering. And that suffering is being passed to different places at different times. Value is based on taxation or on debt, and that debt is a story of owing, of never quite getting there. It's a story of endless pain. So I disagree on the one level that the choice that we are forced to make between a narrative that doesn't work, or if we abandon the narrative that doesn't work, an acceptance that nothing can quite work. Both are wrong. You have to find a third way that understands something that is akin in all the moments of the simulacra of money, which for me is pain. This is a story about pain and about how pain is operating at different points within the system. And that is just the way of it. Any narrative that you assemble for yourself is going to fall into illusion, because it is almost always likely to be too simple. It isn't going to describe the world in which we live in. And that will matter, because for it to be able to become true, it has to distort the very world it thinks it's talking about in ways that are unpredictable, unacceptable. It has to distort then the fabric of the wider simulacra, I suppose, the wider set of fabrics. It's why I don't like this world simulacra, is because actually I think that there is truth in social relations, by which I mean there is pain and there is suffering, there is joy. There is that thing in which we pour our entire humanity. And simply to say, well, they just made up simulacra is to miss the point. It's to miss the point about what it is to exist. But narratives, now that's a different matter, because narratives set themselves up against that fabric and want to resolve it into simple moves. And the minute you do that, then that narrative gets caught up in that which it is not. And all hell can break loose. You end up invading a country and destroying the world economy just for free. That is the world, then, of the narrative that is slipped into a simulacra that any narrative is too simple. Which is why, of course, to understand the world, you need good, far-ranging, complicated ideas. Ideas that are capable of existing at many points and in many different levels, that are capable of weaving the thread of relations. It's always the problem with thinking, you see. As a good philosopher, you always can crawl back into under your abstract rock and say, oh, it's all relations, it's all Simulacara, don't you know? As if that was any sort of solution. As if that answered anything. As if merely shouting, make common notions, without showing you how to do it, answers anything. The problem is always to find ideas that don't arrange simple narratives, but allow you to articulate the very complexities in which we live, by which we live, and using them, really think how to change a world.